So I'd like to welcome all of our panelists back up to take some questions here, of which I have some. So come on up, guys. Great. Okay. Does that work? Okay. All right, great. All right, well, that was certainly a joy for me to hear. I love to nerd out about the different designs. Also like to think about what the future may hold. So I think as an opening question here, I just want to throw it out to everybody. What potential application of your technology in the future are you most excited about?
I think from my perspective personally, I think also my colleagues at X Energy, I think the water desal, water purification application is really great because I think there are going to be wars fought over water in the future, and we want to be one of the solutions.
I can't really disagree, but I think it's really for customers to come up with the demand and say what they actually want to primarily use the machines for. I think our role is to produce them, sort of say, this is a range of possibilities, and then see what the market pull is.
From the Prism point of view, it's quite natural to say that those customers who have a challenge with the nuclear waste, we think this is a good solution, one of the solutions.
Right. All right. Well, thank you for that. So we're looking at nuclear waste. If you guys would like to comment as well, I mean, these aren't your technologies, of course, but when you're looking at advanced nuclear, what do you think in the future?
Yeah, actually, we are having this one small research project about the applications of the nuclear, and like you said, the actual non-electric application is very difficult to generalize because it's always a plant and application that uses it, uses the heat, so you cannot go that, okay, just whole world will use this reactor for this purpose. It's each plant that will use the energy and they optimize around it. So, okay, and I think that this is exactly the reason why we should communicate more that there is possibility to use nuclear energy for that, because at the moment the potential users don't even know that it exists.
That's a really easy question for me, because my favorite application is converting coal plants. The ability to take existing capital assets and provide a different source of heat is, we basically are not going to solve climate change without that strategy. I mean, when you look at what, I mean, people presented different sort of degrees of pessimism about the role that renewables can play. I had a company that was developing storage for wind farms, and we thought we could make a huge amount of power in the United States at least, and maybe Australia and a couple other places. But even when you have the ability to supply a double-digit percentage with one technology, you're going to need a lot of other technologies. And the thing that, I forget who made the point this morning about the additions of renewable energy not even keeping up with the growth of carbon energy. Was that you, Ben? Yeah. That's, if you look at China, for example, which has been a very leading market for renewable energy, their carbon emissions have been growing tremendously while they're deploying huge amounts of renewables. Now, they would have grown further, perhaps, if they hadn't deployed the renewables. But, it would be interesting to go around and ask developing countries that have coal plants that are less than 10 years old if they're interested in shutting those coal plants off and when they would like to do that. You're not going to see that happen. And that means every coal plant built in the last 10 years and all the ones that will be built in the next 10 years will probably run for 60 years. That is a very significant amount of carbon. And so without a technology that we can almost drop in and say, you guys who built these plants and own them and have the condensers in place and the connections to the grid, here you go. Buy this, it will probably be about the same cost as continuing to buy coal and pay some carbon price, and you get to keep your assets. Now, there's two reasons I like this. One is the sort of absolute fact that if you don't turn off plants that are producing CO2, you won't get that reduction in CO2. The other one is that you can do this quickly. And if we were having a longer conference, I have this really groovy model that shows kind of how fast you need to deploy different types of nuclear plants to kind of reduce carbon emissions a certain amount. And when you can put into the model that you can use existing coal plants and just supply a different heat source, the capex is so much lower, right? You're selling a manufactured component that costs a small amount rather than building a whole plant that costs a lot. So you can really kind of chew into the carbon emissions, and doing that in a decade or two is really feasible. So if I had to leave you with one thing out of this, it's that solving that problem is going to be key to actually reducing carbon emissions.
Right.
So
Yeah.
Long answer.
And Jeff, I wanted to add something to that as well. Go ahead, Jeff.
No, I just wanted to make a quick comment where the applications, I think there's a region in the world that the future is actually now, that we can see what's actually taking place and what's to come, and that is in the Middle East. Saudi Arabia, for example, just to name one, they're looking at converting 100% from 100% fossil fuel or actually oil to nuclear is going to be one of the fuel sources, and with that, a cogeneration situation, as in electricity and also water desal. So that whole region is really transforming actually now.
Yeah. I can just say from an advocacy perspective, going into a community that has been relying on coal jobs for decades and saying, don't worry, you're not going to lose your job. We're just going to put a nuclear reactor here instead, and you can go work at that. That's a very enticing prospect, rather than saying, you guys, sorry, we're doing rooftop solar now, or whatever it is, or a gas plant, which is a tenth of the jobs. So let's open it up to larger discussion. Mr. Ben Hurd.
Vila, picking up on what you said, how well, assuming the reactors arrive with the high temperatures, how well do we or do we not understand the interface between those high temperature reactors and the customers? Because in my reading in the literature, it's a really heterogeneous sector, huge number of applications, customers, factories, foundries. What do we need to do? Can we just bolt it on? Are they going to need to retrofit? Are they going to need to replace? Do we even know yet or understand yet that interface between heat and application?
There has been studies done. So basically, in Europe, there is quite a lot of heat that's been termed as plug-in heat. Basically, steam that's coming like 1 kilometer away to a place you use it. So basically, you could just replace this as a nuclear heat. The Chinese high-temperature reactor is they are aiming it to be a plug-in just for the coal power plants, and they are producing basically nuclear heat with 565 degrees steam, which is actually exactly the same number as X energies. So that number is because it's the steam for modern supercritical coil turbine. So basically, so there are some, and if we can separate the heat source from the application, I guess we understand it well, but then there are, of course, more integral. Like, for instance, in Finland, the biorefineries burn their residues and use that as a process heat. So this is a very integrated and very optimized process. And I actually see one of my colleagues here who is very expert on this issue also. Mm-hmm. So it depends.
Yeah. That's great, and actually leads into one of the questions I wanted to ask specifically of Ville and Marcus. How do you see the European nuclear research situation right now, and is it possible to get funding for researching the commercialization of advanced nuclear reactors? And then in general, for the rest of the panel, how are governments supporting this work, and what could they be doing in the future?
Always a dangerous question to a researcher. How do you feel about the funding situation at the moment? On EU level, the thing is that all the funding goes through EU, and it needs to be approved by all of the member states. And as you probably all know, there are states such as Germany and Austria that do not look kindly to nuclear innovation. So on EU level, much of the funding, which is quite small still, is about safety, not innovation. On national level, we have countries such as France, UK, with lots of emphasis on their own domestic industry, and then also some other things, such as in Sweden, they have managed to have a nuclear startup, Lead that's now planning to have this sealer microreactor in Canada. So not on EU level, maybe on national level, depending on how the national policies play out.
Very good question. I think we discussed it in the morning session, not directly, but things which affect this willingness to supply money to nuclear development. Is it European? Maybe we talk about today, I would say so. 2 years ago, I was in an energy seminar arranged by World Energy Council in Helsinki here, and there was a relatively highly positioned European Commission officer who was giving a presentation, and then when he was asked questions about what is the attitude in Europe towards nuclear, he said that if you talk something positive about nuclear, that's not good for your career. So that's one point to answer your question. So if you want to ask for money in Europe for developing nuclear, that might have the same effect. We can see then in general also in Finland, come back here, maybe one and a half or maybe 2 years time flies. Jan Vapaavuori, who is now the mayor of Helsinki, I asked him in the Finlandia house in a big event openly when he was talking for a long time about the most important thing for us is to diminish CO2 emissions, and that's part of our, clean technology developments we have in Finland, which we also subsidize. Then I asked, how do you see, Mr. Minister, nuclear energy, because it fits with your targets to reduce CO2 emissions. Is that a clean carbon technology and participates in this your forums? And he said, next question, please. But he's a good guy, so he came back and he knows me because certain things, and he says, we will do the best so that most of the people can feel being part of this clean carbon. So, I mean, that was a political answer, which made me feel really good. What should I say there? I think in the morning we discussed about not talking about this topic, and I think this event is an excellent one. We talk about it, but we should dare to talk more. We should take it up as a positive thing. We are having nuclear in our portfolio. We should be proud of it. If we are not proud of it, we should stop it. I used to work 5 years for Vattenfall. We made money with nuclear in Germany and with the lignite. We used the money for building up wind power plants and doing very good R&D work and many different things. But the money we did, the businesses where we did the money, it was not seen in a positive way if we talked about it very loudly. So I think the question is very simple and the answer is manifold, but it is unfortunately not an open discussion. It is not that we look at things, positive things are positive, we talk openly, negative are negative. I think we live in a world where there is one truth, and the truth is that nuclear is not the future. And if you touch it, it's not good for you. Unfortunately, because we need nuclear. 1.2 billion people in the world are without electricity. How are we going to fulfill their needs? How are we going to replace maybe those old coal power plants with efficient new ones? Yes, but maybe also with small-sized nuclear with different things. We should definitely look openly at all the technologies, the pros and the cons, and dare ourselves to talk. If we don't talk ourselves, how can we think then nothing is happening?
Well said.
Yeah, I mean, I would just add that I think this is a very useful event because it sort of marries the sort of systemic thinking side, and I'm a great fan of Eric's let's drop a new flame in the old coal boilers, and advanced reactors being that new flame. So you've got that systemic thinking that comes from one end, which needs to be promulgated and start to fit into the thinking of policymakers. Then you've got the sort of more project-oriented side that people like us are doing. And you need that marriage of the two. And I think what governments can do is, Canada's been helpful because they've said that, as regards clean tech, they regard nuclear as a part of their clean tech portfolio. So it's not embarrassingly left on the side. And I think that's vital. I also think that, researchers always want to research, and, researchers often want to research funky things because they're curious and interested people. Now, funky things are good, but if there can be more of a marriage where the project people get the researchers to help their mundane regulatory assurances and provide that evidence base, then the project people can be very helpful use cases for the research people, and a sort of a positive dance can then commence, because otherwise it tends to feed into this narrative of people in white coats, curing a world of the future rather than addressing the instant issues. And clearly, and what this conference is bringing to the fore is that we have a need to marry instant problems with instant solutions.
I just want to add one item to that, which is that a part of the goal of doing this study was to actually brief the modeling teams that do climate and energy modeling. And so we've actually briefed 5 teams. 3 of them do national energy modeling in the United States, and we've briefed a couple international groups as well. We will be continuing that. None of them, they either have a very small percentage of nuclear in their models today, or they show it sort of retiring slowly over time. None of them have advanced nuclear in their models at all. So they're building models that go out as far as 2080, and they assume that there will be no nuclear technology in the future. But what we have found is that all of them are extremely excited by our results. So we're not finding pushback. We're finding, well, nobody came to talk to us about this, or, gee, this is really exciting. We might be able to solve climate change, or, really, really good response. So I just want to put it, second the thing that other people have said, that part of this is showing up and communicating about these things to the right people and being strategic about it. If your neighbor is cranky and doesn't like nuclear, don't waste time talking to them. But find people who matter and find people who are really interested and spend time talking with them. And
yeah, I just wanted to add to that. I feel your pain a little bit, Marcus, as far as Germany goes, because as part of this COP23, the climate talks, we're hoping to screen a new movie that's coming out called The New Fire there, and it's about advanced reactors. So we've contacted every single movie theater in Bonn right now, and the few responses we've gotten have been to the tune of screening a pro-nuclear film would be incompatible with our conscience, and that's the resistance we're facing there. So it's an uphill battle. Let's get some questions from the audience here. I see King had his hand up.
My question is, how do you see the advanced reactor market developing, and what needs to be done to facilitate that? Because I think you've been eloquently discussed that advanced reactor is needed to supplement the existing large reactors for various use, but I see that it requires significant investment to finalize the design, probably $1 billion, and to develop first of a kind. So how do you see, if I make an analogy, you look at the aircraft industry, commercial aircraft, in the 1970s, there's a number of players and engines.
Just a little closer.
So how do you see that maybe any rationalization of the market and development of that?
I'll have a go. I think that the market will be the market. It will evolve. And so the commercial players in it have to demonstrate their commercial applicability and their economics. So anything that assists in that process is going to be helpful. The main challenges are going to be, well, some of the main challenges are going to be regulatory. We still have a jurisdiction by jurisdiction approach to the regulation. If it's an average of 7 years per regulatory system and there are 200 countries, that's an awfully long time if you try and do them in series. So you've got to do them in parallel. So anything that makes that easier by allowing one regulator to take notice of what another regulator has assessed and done is useful. I just think it's probably just a matter of getting, everybody getting their respective acts together and pulling towards mutual outcomes.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, there are actually some bills in the U.S. Congress that are making their way through that would help streamline the regulatory process. The problem is they're kind of been too successful, so much so that people have attached a bunch of riders to them to pass other pieces of legislation that had less of a chance. So they've been slowed down at the moment. Let's take, I think, probably one more question before our break. This gentleman back here has been raising his hand for a while. Here you are.
Thank you very much. My name is Olli Soppela. I'm a young and naive energy engineering student, and I don't yet know how the negotiations behind the scenes go. So that's why I would like to ask, since you have these representatives of these very professional front-leading organizations of the industry, that do you see, which one of the scenarios do you see more realistic, that this is a common mission and big industry players find common ground to work together and become, let's say, single component providers to joint projects around the world? Or is it more so that each one tries to get their turnkey solution done and the winner buys the rest off?
I think that's a general question, not only for these type of reactors, or it's for all the businesses. I believe that we live in a world where openness is the key to success, because via openness you can build partnerships. Via partnerships we create ecosystems. In the ecosystems we invite people who think differently than we do. And via those developments you find the most compelling solutions, and you will create them, not alone. So I believe in the partnership, in the development of ecosystem, the use of mass data and make it smart data, the digitalization, and this combination will those who follow this with openness as the first thinking mode, they will be the winners in the future.
Well, maybe I have the last word here. If history has anything to say on it, once the small guys take the risk and are a little bit successful, then there'll be others to come and grab us up. So we'll see how that works.
All right. Anybody else want to add anything? Fantastic. All right. Well, this has been a great session. Thank you all for your attention. Thank you, panelists, for your comments. Appreciate it. And thank you again, Rauli, for helping make this thing happen. All right. Let's get a cup of coffee and recharge a little bit. Thanks.